Last night, my 7-year-old daughter Madison ran into my bedroom, screaming that Daddy was in the bathroom mirror, warning her that a bad man was coming to hurt us. My husband Ryan has been dead for 5 years. But when I checked our security cameras this morning, there was a man standing in our driveway at 3 a.m., watching our house. My name is Jessica Miller, and I'm 35 years old. I work as a registered nurse at Portland General Hospital, and I've been raising my daughter Madison alone since my husband died in what everyone told me was a tragic construction accident. Until 3 months ago, I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. I thought we'd finally found our new normal, just the two of us in our small house in Southeast Portland, building a quiet life from the pieces of our shattered world. I was wrong, dead wrong. Madison has been having conversations with her father in mirrors since she turned 7. At first, I thought it was normal grief processing for a child who lost her dad when she was only 2. Kids have imaginary friends. They talk to deceased relatives. They create coping mechanisms that adults don't understand. Dr. Adams, the child psychologist I consulted, assured me that Madison's mirror talks with Daddy were perfectly healthy ways for her to maintain a connection to Ryan. Children often use mirrors because they're reflective surfaces that feel magical, Dr. Adams had explained during one of our sessions. It's her way of feeling like she's still connected to her father. As long as it's not interfering with her daily life or causing distress, these conversations are actually quite positive. But Madison's conversations weren't typical childhood imagination. She knew things she shouldn't know. She remembered details about Ryan that she was too young to have experienced herself. And recently, her talks with Daddy had taken a disturbing turn from sweet remembrances to urgent warnings. "Mommy, Daddy says there's a man who hurt him, and now that man wants to hurt us," Madison had told me 2 weeks ago while brushing her teeth. "Daddy says we need to be very careful, and maybe move to Grandma Carol's house." I dismissed it as a bad dream influencing her mirror conversations. Ryan died when a crane collapsed at his construction site. It was a mechanical failure, investigated thoroughly by OSHA and the police. No one was criminally responsible. It was just a terrible accident that took away the love of my life and left me to raise our daughter alone. But last night changed everything. Madison didn't just claim to see Ryan in the mirror. She came running into my room with specific information. "Daddy says Tony Davis is coming tonight to look for the papers," she'd sobbed into my shoulder. "Daddy says Tony is the bad man who made the crane fall down. He says we need to call the police right now." I'd never heard the name Tony Davis before in my life. Ryan had never mentioned anyone by that name. But when I checked our security cameras this morning, there he was, a tall man in dark clothing, standing at the edge of our driveway at 3:17 a.m., looking up at our house like he was planning something. Now I'm sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot during my lunch break, staring at a screenshot from our security system and wondering if my 7-year-old daughter is somehow receiving messages from beyond the grave. Because either Madison has developed an impossible psychic ability, or Ryan's death wasn't an accident at all. And if Ryan's death wasn't an accident, then Madison and I might be in more danger than I ever imagined. 5 years ago, Ryan Miller was everything I thought I wanted in a husband and father. He was 32, built like a linebacker from his years in construction work, but gentle enough to spend hours braiding Madison's hair and reading her bedtime stories in funny voices. He worked as a foreman for Pacific Northwest Construction, a mid-sized company that specialized in commercial buildings and city infrastructure projects. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was solid. Ryan brought home a steady paycheck. I worked 3 12-hour shifts a week at the hospital, and we were slowly saving money for a bigger house with a proper backyard for Madison. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom bungalow in the Woodstock neighborhood, with a tiny kitchen that barely fit our small table and a living room where Ryan would build elaborate blanket forts for Madison every Sunday afternoon. Ryan was the kind of father who never missed a doctor's appointment, who could calm Madison's nightmares with just his presence, and who already had plans to teach her how to ride a bike and throw a baseball. He called her his little sunshine and me his beautiful nurse, and I genuinely believed we were building the kind of marriage that would last forever. The morning he died started like any other. Ryan kissed my forehead at 5:30 a.m. before leaving for the construction site. Downtown, Madison was still asleep, curled up in her toddler bed with the stuffed elephant he'd won for her at the county fair. I was getting ready for my shift when my phone rang at 9:47 a.m. "Mrs. Miller, this is Captain Rodriguez with Portland Fire and Rescue. There's been an accident at your husband's worksite. You need to come to Oregon Health and Science University Hospital immediately." The crane collapse made the local news. A mechanical failure had caused a 60-foot crane to topple over during the construction of a new office building downtown. Ryan had been inspecting foundation work directly below the crane when it fell. 3 other workers were injured, but Ryan took the worst of it. He died instantly, they told me. He never suffered. The investigation took 2 months. OSHA found that the crane's hydraulic system had a manufacturing defect that caused catastrophic failure. The construction company wasn't at fault. The crane manufacturer settled with the families quietly. Everyone agreed it was a terrible accident, the kind of workplace tragedy that happens despite safety protocols and careful planning. I threw myself into single motherhood with the same determination I brought to nursing. Madison was only 2, so she adapted to Ryan's absence better than I did. She would occasionally ask where Daddy went, and I told her that Daddy had to go to heaven, but that he loved her very much and was always watching over her. My mother Carol moved from Salem to help with Madison during my hospital shifts. My younger brother Mike, who lived in Seattle, drove down every few weekends to help with yard work and home maintenance. The life insurance money paid off our mortgage, so I didn't have to worry about losing the house. Slowly, painfully, we built a new routine. Madison started kindergarten, made friends, excelled in her classes. She was bright, curious, and surprisingly resilient. She rarely mentioned Ryan, and when she did, it was with the matter-of-fact acceptance that only children seem to possess. "Daddy lives in heaven now, but he still loves me," she would say, as if this explained everything. It wasn't until she turned 7 that the mirror conversations began. At first, they seemed innocent enough. She would stand in front of the bathroom mirror after brushing her teeth and have quiet conversations with her reflection. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was talking to Daddy. "He likes to visit me in the mirror," she explained with 7-year-old logic. "He says I'm getting so big and that he's proud of me for helping you with groceries." Dr. Adams assured me this was normal. Children often create these kinds of spiritual connections with deceased parents, especially when they're old enough to understand death but still young enough to believe in magic. As long as Madison wasn't withdrawing from real relationships or becoming obsessed with the conversations, there was no cause for concern. But over the past 3 months, Madison's mirror talks had become more detailed, more specific, and increasingly focused on warnings rather than comfort. She would emerge from the bathroom with messages about locking doors, avoiding certain routes home from school, and being careful around strangers. "Daddy says there are bad people who didn't want him to tell secrets," she told me last month. "He says that's why he had to go to heaven, but now the bad people think we might know the secrets too." I'd scheduled additional sessions with Dr. Adams, wondering if Madison was developing anxiety or if something at school was frightening her. But Madison seemed perfectly normal in every other aspect of her life. She played with friends, did well in 2nd grade, and showed no signs of trauma or distress. Until last night, when she ran into my room with a name I'd never heard and a warning that turned out to be terrifyingly accurate. The security footage was unmistakable. At 3:17 a.m., a tall man in dark clothing had stood at the edge of our driveway for nearly 10 minutes, looking up at our house. The camera angle showed him clearly checking windows, examining the layout, and taking photos with his phone. This wasn't someone lost or confused. This was someone conducting surveillance. I called my brother Mike immediately after reviewing the footage. "Jessica, you need to call the police right now," he said after I sent him the screenshot. "And pack a bag for you and Madison. You're not staying in that house tonight." "But Mike, what if this is just a coincidence?" What if Madison heard the name Tony Davis somewhere, and it's just mixing with her grief imagination? Jess, listen to yourself. A 7-year-old doesn't just randomly know the name of someone who shows up outside your house in the middle of the night. Something is very wrong here. I spent my lunch break researching Tony Davis online. What I found made my hands shake. Tony Davis, 43, had multiple arrests for assault, intimidation, and one charge of witness tampering that was dropped when the witness disappeared. He'd worked for various construction companies over the past decade, including Pacific Northwest Construction, including Ryan's company. When I got home from my shift, Madison was in the bathroom, standing in front of the mirror with her usual serious expression, having one of her conversations with Daddy. "What is Daddy telling you today, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to keep my voice normal. Madison turned to me with troubled eyes. "He says Tony Davis was supposed to be his friend, but Tony was taking money from bad people. Daddy found papers that proved it, and he was going to show them to the police. But Tony made the crane fall down before Daddy could tell anyone." My blood ran cold. "Madison, where did you learn about papers and police?" "Daddy told me. He says the papers are still hidden in our house somewhere, and Tony wants to find them before we do. Daddy says if we find papers first, we can show the police that Tony is a bad man." I knelt down to Madison's eye level. "Honey, this is very important. Has anyone else talked to you about your daddy, or about papers, or about Tony Davis? A teacher, or someone at school, or anyone else?" "No, Mommy, only Daddy in the mirror. He says he's been trying to tell you for a long time, but you can't see him like I can. He says little kids are better at seeing people in heaven because we still believe in magic." That evening, I called Dr. Adams for an emergency consultation. "Jessica, there are 2 possibilities here," she said after I explained everything. "Either Madison has developed some kind of psychic sensitivity, which is outside my area of expertise, or she's been exposed to information about her father's death that she's processing through these mirror conversations. Has anyone in your family ever discussed the possibility that Ryan's death wasn't accidental?" "Never. Everyone accepted the investigation. Results: it was a mechanical failure." "Then I think you need to take this seriously from a safety perspective. Whether or not Madison is actually communicating with Ryan, she clearly knows information that suggests your husband's death should be reinvestigated. And if someone is surveilling your house, that information might be putting you both in danger." I spent the night awake, researching everything I could find about Pacific Northwest Construction, Tony Davis, and the crane accident that killed Ryan. What I discovered kept me up until dawn, reading through news reports, construction industry websites, and public records. Pacific Northwest Construction had been involved in 3 projects over the past decade where safety violations resulted in injuries or deaths. Each time, investigations found equipment failures rather than company negligence. Each time, the families received settlements that included non-disclosure agreements. Each time, Tony Davis had been the safety the probably supervisor on the project. At 6 a.m., Madison appeared in my doorway, fully dressed for school. "Mommy, Daddy says we can't go to school today. He says Tony is coming back, and this time he's going to try to get inside the house. Daddy says we need to find the papers today before Tony does, and then we need to go somewhere safe." "Madison, where are these papers hidden?" She took my hand and led me to Ryan's old workshop in the basement, a space I'd barely entered since his death because it was too painful. She pointed to Ryan's workbench, specifically to an old toolbox that I'd assumed contained just construction tools. "Daddy says look in the bottom part, under the fake bottom. He says he made a special hiding place where Tony would never think to look." I opened the toolbox with trembling hands. It contained exactly what I expected: hammers, screwdrivers, measuring tapes. But when I lifted out the main tray, I found something unexpected underneath. The bottom of the toolbox was slightly higher than it should be, creating a hidden compartment just big enough to hold a manila envelope. Inside the envelope were photocopies of invoices, payment records, and correspondence between Pacific Northwest Construction and a company called Cascade Development Partners. The papers documented systematic overbilling, safety equipment purchases that were never made, and payoffs to city inspectors to overlook violations. Ryan had discovered that his company was part of a corruption scheme that put workers' lives at risk for profit. And according to his handwritten notes in the margins, he'd planned to take this evidence to the FBI the week he died. At the bottom of the envelope was a letter addressed to me. Jess, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. Tony Davis threatened me when he found out I had these documents. I'm going to the FBI tomorrow, but if I don't make it, please make sure these papers get to the right people. I love you and Madison more than life itself. Ryan. Madison was standing beside me, watching my face as I read. Daddy says you understand now, she said quietly. And he says we need to hurry. I stared at Ryan's letter until the words blurred, my hands shaking as the full reality of our situation sank in. My husband hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered for trying to expose corruption that put innocent workers' lives at risk. And now, 5 years later, Madison and I were in danger because Tony Davis suspected we might have the evidence Ryan died protecting. Madison, we need to leave the house right now, I said, stuffing the papers back into the envelope. We're going to Grandma Carol's house, and I'm calling the police from there. Daddy says that's good, but first we need to get his backup copies. I froze. What backup copies? Madison led me back upstairs to our bedroom and pointed to the closet. Daddy says he made copies of the important papers and hid them in your special jewelry box, the one that plays music. The jewelry box had been Ryan's gift to me on our 5th anniversary. It was an antique music box with a dancing ballerina that played Für Elise when wound up. I'd kept it on my dresser but rarely opened it since Ryan died because the music made me too sad. When I opened the box, underneath my wedding rings and a few pieces of costume jewelry, I found a small USB drive taped to the bottom. Daddy says there are more papers on there, and videos of Tony saying mean things about workers who ask too many questions about safety. Madison explained with the matter-of-fact tone she always used when delivering messages from Ryan. Daddy says Tony doesn't know about the USB drive because he made it at work and brought it home the night before he died. I was packing our emergency bag when Madison suddenly ran to the front window. Mommy, Daddy says Tony is coming up the street right now. We need to go out the back door. I looked out the window and saw a black pickup truck moving slowly down our street, the driver clearly examining house numbers. It was 10:30 inches the morning, broad daylight, but something about the truck's deliberate pace made my skin crawl. We slipped out the back door and through our neighbor's yard to where I'd parked my car on the next street over, something I'd started doing since seeing the security footage. As we drove away, I saw the black pickup truck pull into our driveway. From the parking lot of a grocery store 3 miles away, I called Detective Lisa Johnson, whom I'd found online as the lead investigator for construction industry crimes in Portland. Detective Johnson, my name is Jessica Miller. My husband Ryan was killed 5 years ago in a crane collapse at a Pacific Northwest construction site. I have evidence that suggests he was murdered, and I believe my daughter and I are now being targeted by the same person who killed him. There was a pause. Mrs. Miller, I remember that case. It was ruled an accidental death after a thorough investigation. I have documents showing that my husband discovered corruption at his company and was planning to report it to the FBI. I also have evidence that Tony Davis, who worked as a safety supervisor, was involved in covering up safety violations that led to multiple deaths. Where are you right now, Mrs. Miller? I'm in a grocery store parking lot with my daughter. Tony Davis was surveilling our house last night, and he's there right now. I have photos from our security camera. Stay where you are. I'm sending a patrol car to your location, and I want you to bring everything you have to the police station immediately. Do not go back to your house. While we waited for the police, Madison sat in her car seat, apparently having another conversation with Ryan in the rearview mirror. What is Daddy telling you now? I asked. He says he's proud of you for being brave, and he says the police will believe us, because Detective Johnson investigated one of Dottie, in Gaddick.com/place, Tony's other accidents before. Daddy says she's been waiting for someone to bring her proof. 20 minutes later, Detective Johnson arrived with 2 patrol officers. She was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and sharp eyes that reminded me of the veteran nurses I worked with at the hospital. Mrs. Miller, I need to tell you something, she said after reviewing Ryan's documents and the USB drive contents in her patrol car. Pacific Northwest Construction has been on our radar for years. We've suspected corruption and safety violations, but we've never had enough evidence for criminal charges. These documents and this USB drive could be exactly what we need. Detective, my 7-year-old daughter has been receiving warnings about Tony Davis through conversations she has with her deceased father in mirrors. I know how that sounds, but she's been accurate about everything so far, including Tony's name and the location of hidden evidence. Detective Johnson looked at Madison, who was quietly coloring in a notebook while sitting in my car. I've been investigating suspicious deaths for 15 years, Mrs. Miller. I've learned not to dismiss any source of information, no matter how unusual it seems. Right now, your daughter's warnings have led us to evidence that could solve multiple cases and prevent future deaths. She radioed for additional units to secure our house and locate Tony Davis. We're going to need you and Madison to stay in protective custody until we can arrest Davis and determine the full scope of this corruption. Are you prepared for that? I looked at Madison, who was now smiling at something she saw in the car's side mirror. Daddy says we're going to be safe now, she told me, and he says he can finally rest because the bad man won't be able to hurt any more daddies. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like Ryan was really watching over us. The police operation unfolded like something from a crime drama. Detective Johnson coordinated with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, and within 6 hours, they had warrants for Tony Davis's arrest and search warrants for Pacific Northwest Construction's offices. The USB drive Ryan had hidden contained not just documents, but video recordings he'd made with his phone of Tony Davis discussing bribery schemes and threatening workers who asked questions about safety violations. Madison and I spent 3 days in a safe house while the investigation expanded. The evidence Ryan died protecting revealed a corruption network that extended far beyond one construction company. City inspectors, equipment rental companies, and even some police officials were involved in covering up safety violations in exchange for cash payments and political favors. Your husband was incredibly brave, Detective Johnson told me during one of our debriefing sessions. These recordings show Tony Davis directly threatening him 2 days before the crane collapse. Ryan knew he was in danger, but he was determined to expose the corruption because he knew other workers would die if he stayed silent. The most damning evidence was a recording Ryan had made the night before he died. On the USB drive, hidden in a file labeled Madison's Birthday Video, was 20 minutes of Ryan documenting everything he'd discovered and his plans to contact the FBI the following morning. If something happens to me, Ryan said on the recording, Tony Davis and his associates at Cascade Development Partners are responsible. They've been systematically cutting safety corners and bribing inspectors to look the other way. The crane that's supposed to be inspected tomorrow has a hydraulic system that Tony deliberately damaged to cause a failure. He thinks I don't know, but I documented everything. The recording showed that Ryan had discovered Tony's plan to cause the crane collapse, but he'd underestimated how quickly Tony would act. Ryan thought he had time to report the corruption before anyone got hurt. Instead, Tony had triggered the crane failure that morning before Ryan could reach the FBI. Jess, if you're watching this, it means I didn't make it to the FBI office, Ryan continued on the recording. But I need you to know that our life together was the best thing that ever happened to me. Take care of our sunshine, and tell her that Daddy loves her more than all the stars in the sky. On the 3rd day of our protective custody, Detective Johnson arrived with news that changed everything. Tony Davis was arrested this morning attempting to flee to Mexico. During his interrogation, he confessed to causing the crane collapse that killed your husband. He also provided information about 12 other construction site accidents over the past decade that were actually murders designed to silence workers who discovered safety violations. But the most shocking revelation came when they searched Tony's house. Among his possessions, they found detailed surveillance photographs of Madison and me taken over the past 6 months. He'd been planning to eliminate us for half a year, waiting for the right opportunity. Mrs. Miller, Tony Davis has been watching your family since last spring. He became concerned when Madison started school and began talking about her daddy at show and tell. One of his associates has a child in Madison's class, and they reported that Madison sometimes mentioned things about her father's work that made Tony nervous. What kind of things? According to the other child's parent, Madison would sometimes say that her daddy told her about bad people at his work who hurt other daddies. Tony was afraid that Ryan had shared information with you that Madison might innocently reveal. The revelation that Madison had been unconsciously sharing Ryan's warnings through normal childhood conversations was chilling. If Madison hadn't started having her mirror conversations with specific warnings, Tony might have succeeded in silencing us before we ever knew. We were in danger. During our final interview at the safe house, Detective Johnson asked Madison directly about her conversations with Ryan. "Madison, can you tell me how you're able to talk to your daddy?" Madison considered this question seriously, the way she approached all adult inquiries. Daddy says that when people love each other very much, love is stronger than dying. He says he couldn't come back as a regular person, but he could come back in mirrors because mirrors show what's really there, not just what people think they see. Does Daddy have anything else he wants us to know? Madison nodded solemnly. Daddy says to tell Detective Johnson that there are more papers hidden at his work, in a place called the safety locker that only foremen can open. He says those papers will help catch the other bad people who worked with Tony. Detective Johnson and I exchanged looks. Madison had just provided information about evidence locations that she couldn't possibly know about, through normal means. Madison, does Daddy say anything else? He says he's very proud of Mommy for being so brave, and he says now that the bad man is caught, he doesn't need to visit the mirrors as much, but he says he'll always be watching over us, and if we ever need him, we can find him in any mirror by telling him we love him. 2 weeks later, the additional evidence Madison had directed them to led to the arrest of 6 more people involved in the corruption scheme, including a city inspector and the owner of Cascade Development Partners. The day Tony Davis was formally charged with Ryan's murder and 11 other deaths, Madison and I finally went home to our house in southeast Portland. That evening, Madison stood in front of the bathroom mirror for what she said would be her last regular conversation with Daddy. "What is he telling you tonight, sweetheart?" I asked. Madison smiled, a peaceful expression I hadn't seen on her face in months. "Daddy says the bad people can't hurt any more families now, and that means he can finally go to the peaceful part of heaven. But he says he'll always love us, and whenever we miss him, we should look in mirrors and remember that love is stronger than anything, even dying." As we turned to leave the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw Ryan standing behind us, his hand on Madison's shoulder, smiling at both of us. Maybe it was just the reflection of the hallway light. Maybe it was wishful thinking. Or maybe Madison was right about love being stronger than death. Either way, for the first time since Ryan died, I felt truly safe. 6 months after Tony Davis's conviction, Madison and I had settled into a new kind of normal. The legal proceedings were finally complete, with Tony receiving a life sentence without parole for Ryan's murder and the deaths of 11 other construction workers over a decade-long corruption scheme. The wrongful death settlement from Pacific Northwest Construction and the FBI's witness protection compensation meant that Madison and I were financially secure for the first time since Ryan's death. But the real changes in our life weren't financial. They were deeper, more profound than anything money could provide. Madison had stopped having daily conversations with Ryan in mirrors, just as she'd predicted. But occasionally, when she was worried about something at school or missing her father particularly intensely, she would stand quietly in front of our bathroom mirror for a few minutes. She would always emerge with a peaceful expression and some piece of wisdom that seemed far beyond her 8 years. "Daddy says that when you're scared about starting 3rd grade, you should remember that being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid," she told me on the night before school started. It means you do the right thing even when you are afraid. I'd started seeing a grief counselor who specialized in families that had experienced traumatic loss. Dr. Patricia Williams helped me understand that whether Madison's communications with Ryan were supernatural or psychological, they had served a crucial healing function for both of us. What's important, Dr. Williams explained, is that Madison found a way to maintain a healthy connection with her father's memory while also moving forward with her life. And those conversations, real or imagined, led to justice for Ryan and protection for your family. The investigation into Pacific Northwest construction revealed that Ryan's evidence had prevented dozens of future deaths. The company was permanently shut down, and new federal regulations for construction safety oversight were implemented across the Pacific Northwest. Ryan had become a posthumous whistleblower whose courage saved countless lives. I returned to work at Portland General Hospital, but with a new appreciation for how fragile life could be and how important it was to speak up when something wasn't right. I started volunteering with a nonprofit organization that provided support services for families of workplace accident victims, particularly those who suspected their loved ones' deaths weren't really accidents. Madison excelled in third grade and made new friends, but she also maintained a special sensitivity to other children who had experienced loss. Her teacher told me that Madison had an unusual gift for comforting classmates who were struggling with grief or family problems. "She has an old soul," her teacher said. "Madison seems to understand things about life and death that most children her age haven't learned yet. But it's not a burden for her. It's like a special kind of wisdom." One evening in late fall, Madison and I were carving pumpkins for Halloween when she looked up at me with Ryan's thoughtful expression. "Mommy, do you think Daddy really talked to me in the mirrors? Or do you think I just imagined it?" I considered how to answer this question, one I'd been asking myself for months. "Madison, I think love creates connections that we don't always understand. Whether Daddy was really visiting you, or whether your love for him was so strong that it helped you know things you needed to know, the important thing is that those conversations kept us safe and helped bring justice for Daddy and all the other families. So it doesn't matter if it was real magic or heart magic. I think they might be the same thing, sweetheart." That night, as I tucked Madison into bed, she made an announcement that surprised me. "Mommy, I think we should get a kitten. Daddy says our house has been sad for too long, and a kitten would make it happy again." It was the first time in months that Madison had mentioned a conversation with Ryan, and it was about something joyful rather than protective. Maybe it was her way of saying that we were ready to start building new happiness instead of just healing from old pain. 2 weeks later, we adopted an orange tabby, a kitten from the animal shelter where Ryan and I had volunteered when Madison was little. Madison named him Sunny because she said his purr sounded like sunshine. As I write this story, it's been almost a year since Tony Davis was arrested. Madison is thriving in school. I've started dating someone new, a kind pediatrician named David who understands that Ryan will always be part of our family, and our house feels full of life again. Madison still occasionally talks to Ryan in mirrors when she needs guidance, but now those conversations are private, peaceful moments rather than urgent warnings. She's learned that her connection to her father is something special that she can carry with her forever, not something she needs to cling to out of fear. Last week, Madison came home from school with a drawing she'd made for art class. It showed our family, me, Madison, Ryan, with angel wings, our kitten, and David, all standing together in front of our house. At the bottom, she'd written, "Love is stronger than anything." When I asked her about including David in our family picture, she said, "Daddy told me it's okay to love new people without forgetting old people. He says love grows bigger when you share it, not smaller." That evening, I caught my reflection in our bathroom mirror and realized that I was smiling. For the first time since Ryan died, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future. Not because I'd forgotten my loss or moved on from my grief, but because I'd learned that love really is stronger than death, and that sometimes the people we lose find ways to keep protecting us even when they can't be with us anymore. As I turned off the bathroom light, I whispered, Thank you, Ryan. For everything. I could have sworn I heard him whisper back, take care of our sunshine, beautiful, I love you both. Maybe it was just the wind outside. Maybe it was wishful thinking. Or maybe love really does find a way to transcend even death. Madison would probably say, they're all the same thing. And maybe my wise little girl is right.